In the beginning, before the creation of all things, God has always existed. He is the author of the story of the world. God spoke, and at the sound of his voice, a beautiful universe sprang into existence. By his words, he launched the galaxies and the stars. And all things were created by God, and all that God created was through him. God created the earth. He spoke and lifted the land out from the oceans, and he sent the lightning and rain to fill the world with his glory. And God loved all that he created. The tallest peaks, the rivers that flowed from them, and all the creatures that he designed himself. The creatures of the sea and of the air and of the forests and of the fields. But the greatest of all his creations was mankind. And with his hands, God formed the first man. And after Adam, God formed the perfect partner, Eve. They were given a perfect garden on earth as their home, to enjoy his creation and to take care of the world. But then they were deceived. A rebel found them in the garden. Taking the form of a serpent, Satan, the deceiver, whispered lies to the humans. He convinced them to break the one rule God had given them. Satan told them to choose their own selfish way instead of trusting in God's way. When they did, they were separated from God. Because of their sin, they could no longer live in friendship with him in the garden. The good creation was corrupted, and the world fell into darkness and death. For thousands of years, people were separated from God. The first sin grew and infected people with a curse, driving them towards hatred of one another and of God, the one who had made them. But God still loved his people, and he made a plan to rescue them. So God introduced himself to a man named Abraham, and promised him that through his family, hope and light would come to the world once again. Generations passed, and just as God promised, Abraham's family multiplied and became the nation known as Israel. And from Israel, godly people who were called prophets were given special messages from God. They began to speak of a coming light, the Savior, who would rescue humanity from the darkness of death and restore the broken relationship between God and his people. And in a town called Nazareth, the words God gave to the prophets began to prove themselves true. In this town, a young Israelite woman named Mary was visited by an angel. a messenger from God. The angel Gabriel told her that although she was not yet married, God would perform a miracle and create a child within her. She would give birth to a son who was the source of God's light. Gabriel told her that her child would become the long-awaited king, the king who would reign over the family of Abraham and over all the world for all eternity. Mary sang a song of praise. She knew God was keeping his promise to Abraham. The creator of all things was becoming a human himself to save his people. Jesus, her child, the Savior, the light of the world, would soon arrive. And finally, when it came time for the Savior to be born, Mary and the man she was engaged to, Joseph, were visiting the town of Bethlehem. But they had no place to stay that was warm and comfortable. Mary gave birth to Jesus in the place where the animals eat. She wrapped him in cloth and placed him in a manger, a feeding trough for the animals that slept there. And the Savior God was now a human baby. God, a meek, humble, human baby. The angels began to spread the message to those who were near that the Savior had been born. God had come down to rescue the world from sin and death and to be the goodness and light the world so desperately needed. An angel appeared to the shepherds who were living out in the fields, keeping watch over their sheep. Light from the gathered angels shone brightly around them, and the shepherds were frightened. But the angel told them not to be afraid, that he had a message of joy, that the Savior had been born. Then a great crowd of angels joined him, and they were praising God in front of all the shepherds. The shepherds rushed to town to visit and worship the baby Jesus there in the manger. And they went around praising God and telling everyone that the Savior was born. A bright star rose high above Bethlehem for all to see. Wise pilgrims from the east journeyed to see Jesus when they saw the light of God in the star. The tyrant king over the land was frightened because he heard of the birth of a baby, a child of whom it was said would be king. For this child was the Messiah, Savior, the promised blessing that God had made to Abraham all those generations ago. He was Jesus, salvation. He had come to fulfill God's rescue plan, the great promise and purpose of God to bring light back into the world again. He came to heal humanity from the curse of sin and death and to redeem all of creation. And Jesus is God's light brought back into the world. He was and is that same light God radiated in the very beginning. And through his life, death, and resurrection, hope and light were given to all the world.
Thank you.